Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As I gaze around the gathering of like-minded men and women aviation enthusiasts at the old Fliers group, I've always been impressed by the ongoing enthusiasm and interest in all things pertaining to the craft of aviation. Some of you may have nurtured your interest in this location, while others have come from a distant lands. In addressing the ladies and gentlemen gathered here, I accept that not all have been struck by the need to grasp one hand on the control column and the other on the throttle or two. So please forgive me when I address the Biggles wannabes present. Can you help me now, please, as we endeavour to walk down memory lane? Can I have a show of hands to see how many of you have had the pleasure and can remember your first solo? Yes, thank you. That special inspirational moment when the instructor stepped out of the aircraft and suggested that you go out and fly the pattern by yourself and not kill yourself. I can vividly remember the absolute HDD quality of my first event, and that was 57 years ago. I was inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's quote that stated, "For once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skywards, for there you have been, and there you will long to return." Notwithstanding our collective histories, what brings you to the old Fliers group each month is the interest in the location to be remembered with affection. This wilderness of the south of Perth that was forged from the swamplands back in the 60s, the land of the Noongar Budja, void of everything except for banksia trees, grass trees, zamia palms, snakes, ticks, goannas and kangaroos. We're looking at a slide of Jandakot taken from a DC-3 in 1963, taken by this man who's sitting here, Brian Herman. Or is that the reason you come here, for the land? Or is it the renewed interest in aircraft that have formed a lifelong interest for designs that inspired you to look to the skies? The RFDS aircraft, the Cessna 180 in the middle, Foxtrot Delta Hotel, was my favourite. I used to love flying with that. Unfortunately, it's been struck off now. Or you look at the Boeing Stearman, a pristine aeroplane, beautiful aeroplane. Or the Spitfire, that's at Perth it was at Perth Airport here, and you will notice on the wing there, we're very fortunate today. We have one of those people, the young man sitting on the right hand at the front of the aeroplane there, Vivian Chappell. Would you stand up, please, Vivian? Thank you, Vivian. The Chappell family were an inspiration here. There was, how many were there, Viv?
There was 4 of us all together. There was Keith, Arthur, Stan and myself.
Yes, there was quite a dynasty here, the Chappell brothers. And then you look at this aeroplane, the Chipmunk. This is one of those people out of that flight. Lang was his name. He crashed and was burned. That's in Rusmoyne. They had it was very fortunate that he managed to survive, but he got badly burned. Or you look at that aeroplane there. That was another Chipmunk that crashed down there at Rusmoyne in the training area. And there's an interesting thing about that flight. You can see the back of the aeroplane. The passenger that was sitting in the back thought his back had broken because it was in there, and he couldn't get out of the seat. He thought his back had broken. And they said, "Release your seatbelt." So he released his seatbelt and the tail fell off. Because you see, the seatbelt had a long cable went down and attached to the back of the fuselage. So he was saved. A miracle. Or you can look at something like the P-51, or my favourite, the old C-47. The Mosquito. One of my favourite aircraft, the Catalina. I managed to get a flight in one in New Zealand a couple of years ago. A noisy but wonderful flight. And this is an interesting picture. There's 10 tons, I worked out, of people sitting on that top wing. I believe In coming to Jandakot here, there's an amalgam of all the aspects from above. I will try to paint a picture of what I have gained from my relationship with this place called Jandakot. So many people have flight planned with me from takeoff to now, so I'll now try and pay homage to them. Frank Cahoon, I say it, Mr. Cahoon. In those days, you didn't refer to the man by his Christian name. He was Mr. Cahoon. He was the chief engineer. He wrote this book, Cockpit and Spanner, some of you might have read. It's an inspirational flight, a story about the early days of flight in West Australia. Frank Cahoon was an aircraft engineer with the Gromsmiller Aviation Company, and he was a wonderful man to deal with. Or then you can look at a man like Don Endy. Now Don, during my apprenticeship days, I shared many adventures with Don, who was tragically killed in a Mitsubishi MU-2 north of Meekatharra. Just over 1,500 people gathered at his funeral back in January 1990. Don's brother Jan has spoken at the old Fliers group many times. We look at Maylands here from the air, an aerial photograph, another one of Brian's. And we look at the tarmac scene here with the various hangars there. Then we look at some of the old pilots that used to be here. They were the West Farmers crop spraying pilots. They used to fly Tiger Moths, DH-82s. One of the pilots from that group there, Slim Summerfield. Now Slim was the crop spraying pilot, and they overloaded his Cessna 180 on takeoff. And so he crashed, the port wing was ripped off, and Slim was jammed in the aeroplane with the starboard wing up in the air and was cutting into his throat. And the farmer came up and said, I'll fix you up, mate, I'll go and get the oxytorque and we'll cut you out. And he had fuel dripping on his face at that stage. So Slim, no. He got himself out. Now, to get into Maylands to be serviced, we used to do 75 hours, not 100 hours as they do now. They used to fly into the Jandakot airstrip. That's it on the middle of the screen there. You can see it there again on the screen. That was adjacent to runway 24 out here. And the Tiger Moths had come in and land there, and we had one radio set. We'd sit on the seat, and they would fly across to Maylands, and we would service that aircraft that night. They would fly back to the airfield there. We'd take the radio out, the next one would come in. So we had 5 aircraft, and we were doing that all the time, just on rotation. I commenced my flying at Perth Airport back in the Royal Aero Club days. This is the Aero Club. And my first instructor was a man by the name of Doug Spears. Now, in the early days of Stretching Wings and commenced my flying training there, Doug, he continued his meritorious career with TAA and Qantas, logging many varied types of aircraft before he retired. You may remember a Boeing 727 was departing runway 16 on a night flight to Perth back in 1971 when a Canadian DC-8 taxied out in front of him on the runway. Now, runway 16 has a hump in it, so you can't see from one end to the other. But the 727 got airborne just in time to strike the fin, hit the centre of the fuselage of the 727 and ripped it from nose to tail, spewing all its guts out. They managed to do a 40-minute flight before they got back and land. Now, Doug, I've touched base with him many times, and his story is, that story of that aeroplane is a whole new story. I can come back if you want to at some stage. Next slide, I'm talking about people that have come across our paths. Now, this man, Gavin Green. Now, Gavin was one of my instructors. He was a pathfinder when Lancasters in the Second World War, and we had instructors of that ilk teaching us, and they taught things that that we'll never ever learn again. He was a wonderful guy. Unfortunately, he's gone. Most of these people I'm talking about have gone on. You've got Rod Lawrence, the guy sitting in the seat there looking out. And now Rod has gone on as well. He taught me to fly Cessna 180s, and his name was Boots. His hand span was 22 inches. He was the big man. And Tragically, he was killed in a road accident. Then you've got Harry Smelders. Now, does anybody know Harry Smelders?
Smolders, not Smelders.
Like I said, Smolders. That's what I said. I was waiting for somebody to correct me. Harry he taught me aerobatics, and he had a sense of humour and a sense of purpose in life. These are all people that have made a mark in my life as they moved along. We've got a man here, Alan Wright. Now, Alan was just a laney. He works down at the Air Force Association, and if you've ever been down there and seen the mural on that far wall, Alan painted that. Alan did his time in Burma during the Circular War. He was one of the people who were flying over the hump. I worked with Alan in agricultural general aviation way back. He was a real nature's gentleman. Ivan Burrows, this fellow here, I shared office with him for many years, about 12, 13 years. He was an inspector with Department, I think we were Civil Aviation Safety Authority, Department of Transport, Department of Aviation, Aviation Australia. We had 9 different names. And in the end, but we used to go out and help the industry. We'd find out what they needed and we'd help them, correct them if they were wrong, but we tended to help them, not like the punitive effects of the way CASA deals with people now. Now, Ivan got to the stage where he said, I've had enough of this place, I'm out. I said, Ivan, we're going to have a dinner here, or something like that. And he said, no, I'm out. I want nothing more to do with this. I've had enough. He was absolutely disillusioned. So I went over his head. I spoke to his wife. And we had a dinner in this location. And we had 140 people from the industry came and paid to eat here. So that was just the level of the people, the inspectors like Ivan that were there back in those days. Bernie Baldwin. Now, who knows Bernie Baldwin? He was a rascal, a raconteur. He was a. If you shook hands with Bernie, you had to count your fingers afterwards. But he was a lovely guy. That's Bernie's hangar there, not the aeroplane in the front. Bernie he bragged, he said, I've got the biggest hangar on Jandakot. Because that whole strip there, all in front of the hangar, was where he serviced his aircraft, out in the open. And that was Bernie. Bernie's no longer with us. John Ridley. You know, John's another one of my people that we did our apprentice. Ted Robbie here and we did our apprenticeship with John through MMA. You may remember his talk he gave here some months ago at the Old Fliers group, talking about recovering the jumbo jet at Jandakot Airport. Well, that was John Ridley. John did that. He was also the chief engineer at Civil Flying Services, which took over from Millard and O'Sullivan. They're now in the building. They were in the building that Airflight now occupy. I apologise, John. I didn't realise you were here. I knew some of them. Anyhow, he's one of the people that made a mark in my life. Then you've got Ian Leslie Dunn. Now, Dunny is no longer with us. Now, does anybody know Ian Dunn? Yes. What a colourful character he was. But they were colourful, and they were part of the tapestry of Jandakot. And they might have gone, but they still live on in our lives. That's Ian's fleet. So you can see they're all AT 601, 602, 602s, 702s, and what are they? 802s, turbine powered. And that Ian was he was a character. And then you got Robin Miller. Now Robin, I flew with her many times when I was the chief engineer of the Flying Doctor Service earlier on. She flew the Mooney. The Mooney that's on the plinth down, it's not the same aircraft, but a similar Mooney she flew around as the Sugarbird lady. I had many flights with her. Then we've got people like Frank Greenslade. Does anybody know Frank Greenslade? Now Frank was the AWA, the Amalgamated Wireless Association, and he was a radiotech par excellence. He was fantastic. And Frank also had an eye for historical events, and he pursued the aviation history at Maylands to this extent where he set up the aviation park that's now at Maylands on the threshold near the runway lights at the old Maylands Aerodrome. Or you get Cliffy Brown. Now, Swamp Fox, as they used to call him. He was an engineer working with the Black Catalina Squadron from Crawley way back in the Second World War. And I worked with Cliff over in McRobson Airlines. He was a brilliant bloke. Now, this place used to be like Disneyland on steroids, on Avtur. It was Rob Point's hangar. Has anybody ever been in Rob Point's old hangar? Where he used to service warbirds. And I couldn't get enough of it. I'd just go down there, and oft times I'd go down and set up my easel there and just paint the aircraft, paint the situation, because you kick old 1830 cylinders off lying on the ground, or pieces of bits of old Catalina lying on the ground. It was fantastic. And that's Rob there. I painted him in the cockpit of a DC-3 because at one stage he was trying to do a series circuits around Perth in an old DC-3 that they had here.
This is no ordinary takeoff in the world of aviation. Then again, this is no ordinary pilot. Chris Peru is one of Australia's most well-known aerobatic pilots, and he's as sharp as ever, even at the age of 82. His rise to the top was anything but conventional.
Basically, I was self-taught. The instructor would say, go and do some revision and come back. I'd go out and put the aeroplane through its paces. So all the advanced stuff was self-taught.
Those advanced manoeuvres pushing Chris's body to its limits.
It's pretty severe. I push about 6.5 negative G, and then with positive G, I'm pulling about 12 Gs. Because I'm used to it, you don't feel it. It's just when you land, you feel a bit tired because it's pretty tough on your body, because your body stretches. I don't know how far, but it does.
Chris has won a swag of titles over his 6 decades of flying, and it's easy to see why.
I've flown in a formation of 3 aeroplanes, and we won the Australian title 7 times, and I've been the Australian champion 13 times in solo aerobatics.
Away from competitions, Chris has been seen on the big screen.
Been a stunt double in a lot of movies. The last one was Kangaroo Jack.
It's an interesting sideline, especially when you consider his day job, aviation accident investigator and loss adjuster.
You leave all your earthly problems behind. You're so focused on what you're doing. And it's like, I guess, ballet in blue, if you like.
Chris still travels around the country to perform at air shows with his flying partner Warren Stewart. Stunning crowds with manoeuvres just like this.
Warren's 83 and has been flying with Chris for 30 years.
Between the pair of us, we have to have this very close reliance on each other and confidence, which we've got pretty well right from the start, and we've kept that now for all these years. This is not a job. This is probably a super hobby.
With such a rich history together, these octogenarians have no plan to give it away.
People ask me that. They say, "Oh, because of your age, how do you keep going?" I said, "Well, I know."
But Chris Peru knows that time will come, one day.
When I've got to start thinking about it while I'm up there doing it, give it away. It's going to be a bad end result after that.
Until then, he's happy to keep turning his life upside down. Charles Bryce, ABC News, Murray Bridge.
I leave you with the poem that you all know, and I won't recite it, High Flight. it epitomises what I feel about aviation, and I'm sure you all know the words well. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.